see, once upon a time, this Greek-speaking nation had conquered the world. Everybody must have been very familiar with the language of Greek.
All right, let's see it.
After Jesus left the earth, they would finally start writing the New Testament. Naturally, they wrote it in the most popular language, which was Greek. But because of this, the name Yeshua would actually end up getting changed.
So two things to say here. The first is that this statement is factually incorrect. It was not the New Testament that facilitated any change in the way this name was transliterated. It had already been transliterated into Greek as Jesus centuries before Jesus was even born for the translation of the Hebrew Bible into Greek, what we now know as the Septuagint. Nothing changed with the composition of the New Testament. The Septuagint transliterated the longer and the shorter form of the names, Yehoshua and Joshua, into Greek as Jesus. Nothing changed with the New Testament. Second thing to say is that pronouncing it Yeshua is also significantly different from how it was pronounced anciently. They never pronounced it Yeshua anciently. And there are three main differences from how Jesus likely would have pronounced his own name. The first has to do with the fourth letter of the name, the Ein, which is being completely dropped if you pronounce it Yeshua, because the Ein is a consonant that is a glottal consonant, and it is created by constricting the back of the throat. There are no vowels that follow after it. It actually ends the vowel that comes before it. And so the name Yeshua would be Yeshua, and you don't even really have to pronounce that A before it. That's written in the manuscripts, but that tradition of adding those vowels actually comes from centuries after the life of Jesus, and there is a pretty good argument to make that that little furtive patach, that sneaky A there, was not pronounced in the 1st century CE, and so it probably was pronounced something more like Yeshua, where you're constricting the throat to end the oo vowel rather than adding that little furtive patach there at the end. The third thing to note is that there is an argument to make. It's not a consensus view. There is disagreement on this, but there is an argument to make that 1st century Galilean Aramaic would not have pronounced the ein at the end of the word, that they would have left it off. Therefore, they also would have left off the furtive patach. And so that name would have been pronounced either in the long form, Yeshu, or in the short form, Yeshu. And so Jesus' name was probably either pronounced Yeshu, Yeshu, or Yeshu with that glottal consonant at the end. None of those are Yeshua. People who say Yeshua are also using a transliteration, an altered form of the name, to facilitate pronunciation in a language that does not use the same sounds that they used in 1st century CE Galilean Aramaic.
You see, Roman names sound like Brutus or Augustus, and in keeping up with that tradition, the name Yeshua would finally be changed to a much more Western Jesus.
So a few things to say here as well. To begin, I'm not a big fan of the category Western, but if we insist on using it, Yeshua is also a thoroughly Western pronunciation of that name, as I have already explained. The other thing to note here is that writing Jesus skips over 1,500 years of development, because Jesus is not how that name was spelled until the first major revision of the King James Version in 1629. After the consonant J had been introduced to the English alphabet. Prior to that year, all English translations of the Bible had spelled Jesus' name with an I, Jesus. But this is still a secondary English transliteration of a Latin transliteration of a Greek transliteration of the Aramaic. So this raises the question of why we don't change to just using a transliteration that more closely approximates how we think Jesus' name would have been pronounced in 1st century CE Galilean Aramaic, like Yeshu or Yeshu. And there are three main answers to that. The first is that there's nothing wrong with saying the name Jesus. There are people who want to try to assert some kind of metaphysical or moral significance to using a name that somewhat more closely approximates the way it would have been pronounced in the 1st century, but that's based on dogma. There are no data that suggest there's anything wrong with using the name Jesus. Second reason is that our earliest source material of any kind that refers to Jesus of Nazareth is all written in Greek and already uses that transliteration. And so most translators of the Bible are going to honor that source material rather than try to hypothetically reconstruct a pronunciation that was not even used by the people who wrote that source material. Third reason is that English Bible translations build on tradition, and that tradition has a foundation of Greek at the bottom and Latin above that. And publishers are not going to want to break so severely from tradition if they want their Bible translations to sell. And these reasons may not satisfy you, they may not convince you, but those are the reasons that we continue to use Jesus. And maybe someday that'll change, but for the moment that's going to be a bridge too far for most people who read the Bible devotionally.